My Traumatized Babies and Mentally Ill Barbies. It is the second post of the day. And if you don't know, the second post of the day is typically either, it sometimes is a second read. If there is another reading as the second post of the day, typically that's because the second reading is for a much smaller audience. It's a niche read. Usually it has more to do with like occult topics or non-human beings or something like high strangeness, something like that. And less people are going to be interested in that. So when one of those reads comes out, I try to post two just because I like to have something general to go out. So it's serving like the widest amount of people, right? And then the second post is something a little bit more niche. Now, sometimes, and lately, it hasn't been another read. Sometimes the second post of the day is like a spiritual, magical, or manifestation chit-chat video. Or sometimes it will just be like me doing a life update. Or more recently, it is book reviews because I am a writer. And so all of this ties together for me because what we talk about on this channel predominantly, yeah, it's tarot, it's magic, it's spirituality, but it is also storytelling. Storytelling being important and true storytelling. So when I'm talking about books or writing or anything else, it is still about the greatest show on earth, which is life, the true story, the true performance. The cats have the zoomies, so if y'all are hearing more noise than usual, that's why. It is very early. It is very early, and so they are very antsy because their feeding time isn't until a couple of hours from now. But if I'm awake, and especially if I'm up and talking and moving around, to them that means like, oh, it's like you should be feeding us. So that's not how we do things in this house. So hopefully me holding up those books while I did all of that, hello Misha, got me like a good thumbnail. Let's see. Hopefully they pick a good thumbnail for me. If not based off of what I just did, then when I hold up one of these books. So the books that I'm talking about today are the Five Nights at Freddy's novel trilogy, okay? Now, I bought these because I saw the movie, and while I agree with the criticisms of the movie, the general criticisms talking about pacing, tone, like who is this movie really for? When I went to go see it, I was like, what the hell is like, this is like baby's first slow burn psychological horror with like a very, very weird, like comedic tone in it as well. Like it was very strange, but for whatever reason, I really enjoyed it. It's a very awkward film, but I found it very enjoyable, mostly because, and I think a big part of the appeal of Five Nights at Freddy's is the nostalgia feelings it evokes in most of its formats, and also the concept is a really good one, horror-wise. That particular setting, the animatronics in the pizzeria / arcade setting is a really good one, I think. While I was never of like the Five Nights at Freddy's video game person because it is jump scare based, okay? And for me, there is a horror tier, I guess it's a tier list, but the types of horror ranked, okay? And things like jump scares and extreme stuff just for shock factor, just to like gross somebody out or make them like be taken aback, like just because you put it there. Like usually that has something to do with violence, like horrible, horrible, disgusting violence happening to like children or animals or something like that, or people in general. We're just putting that in there and there's really no like rhyme or reason for it. It's just because I know that's horrible, I'm putting it in the book. That type of stuff and the jump scare type of stuff, that is like F rank. It's like negative F rank to me for horror because it requires no skill. It only requires no shame. But here's the thing with Five Nights at Freddy's, it was what it was, and I'm talking about the video games. It was a simple format, And it was effective, especially for reaction content on YouTube. And then when the little hints of lore were dropped in, when a creator does that and they don't explain very much, they just leave the little bits of lore in there and they make it very, very abstract and like it could be lots of different things, people's imaginations run wild. And what that does, it's a very, very beautiful thing. What it does is that the people interacting with whatever content that is, they make that piece of content alive. And that's what tends to make at least like a lot of horror content popular. It is the content that people make alive based on their interaction with it. And so a lot of horror content that ends up blowing up ends up turning into something like an ARG. So for Five Nights at Freddy's, there were the actual short games that were mixed in with lore. And then in between the game releases, the fandom would come up with all of this stuff. They would start trying to piece things together and making things make sense in between all the different games. And then the books that, like the supplementary books that came out, there was all sorts of pieces of the story and the lore mixed in with all of that in simple little puzzles. And then the fandom would all put that together and make big compilation videos about the lore and their theories, and people would come up with their own content. They would make Five Nights at Freddy's fan fiction, artwork, and their own like videos. I think people made their own, they might have made their own games, I don't know, but I know they at least made their own videos. And so I think that that's a wonderful thing. So while I was never into the Five Nights at Freddy's game, I was, for a brief period, I was into the lore. So while I wouldn't play the games, I would watch people's videos showing the backstory. And I watched, like when everything was finally kind of done, I'd watch the big compilation videos. And here's the thing, getting into these books, right? The movie doesn't suffer from the same disease that it seems like the rest of the Five Nights at Freddy's content suffers from, which is strong in the beginning, falls apart at like the midpoint throughout the end. All of these books, so the three novels are The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, The Fourth Closet. These novels are set like sort of back in the lore, and the main, like there are two, like the most relevant characters in the trilogy are Charlie and John. And Charlie is really pretty much the main character, even though we have like a group in each novel. And so Charlie in the Five Nights at Freddy's lore, and I would say, like, I was thinking as I was reading these, oh, well, you don't really need to know much about the lore. Maybe you don't need to know about the lore entirely to enjoy the books. I'm not sure about that, because I even know a decent amount of the lore in general, and these books, like, they're just not, just skip to the end, these are not good books. Like, sorry, like, it's just, these aren't good. They're not good. They are all dealing with the same problem and sort of this meta problem with the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, in that there is no grand plan, right? Like the creator of the game, Scott, right? What's his full name? Scott Cawthon. Okay, like he created the singular game. There was no, like, people think when creators are like making things that there's some like grand plan, that they know like the entire meta story and it's all planned out like before they even take their, like, make the first brush stroke, type out the first line, whatever. That's typically not how it goes. People are creating their worlds as they go. Not all the time. Some people do have things like in general all plotted out, and for like the more Kubrickian creators among us, things are plotted out to the nth like degree until they're even ready to start creating the actual thing. But for the most part, people are making it up as they go. And when that happens, when there's no real plan or structure at all, especially when you're throwing out like abstract pieces of lore, it tends, like, it'll start out strong. You can have like a solid opening that way, but then when you try to build an actual world on it that makes sense going forward and that you can expand outward, in order to create like the real living thing, right? Something that is an actual universe, a solid universe that people want to live in, that requires more than just going off the seat of your pants. And Five Nights at Freddy's very much went off the seat of its pants, and then like the fans blew it up because like the core things that Five Nights at Freddy's is like getting at, it gets at really well. It does it really, really well. That's why it has the staying power that it does. But it's because of the fandom. Really, they're the ones that are doing most of the legwork for Scott Cawthon, okay? And they're the ones that, while you can put Five Nights at Freddy's on anything at this point, the fans will still buy it for the most part. I think that is mostly dying down now, because whenever I watch, like every so often, I'll be like, oh, I feel like watching, like I love the Five Nights at Freddy's vibe, just in general. Let me go watch a lore video again. I always stop watching the lore videos at the same point. I just start tuning out. And it has to do, like, the problem being is that there end up being too many animatronics. Like the solution for all problems in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe is, let's introduce a new animatronic. Let's make yet another location. It just keeps doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then it gets out of being like real abstract about the magic or the supernatural stuff that is going on in universe, and it starts trying to explain everything. And whenever someone starts trying to explain everything, you know it's over. It's over. That is like the death knell of like a world like this. And so Freddy's jumps the shark because it only has one look and it can't turn left, okay? It's not an ambi-turner. So enjoy it for what it is, but as far as something very, very expansive, it is never going to be that thing, at least not in the hands of Scott Cawthon, okay? Like if he turned it over to someone else who tried to transform it, probably it might turn into something, but then it technically wouldn't be Five Nights at Freddy's, and I don't know that the fans would appreciate that. Let's talk about the format of these novels, because they're pretty much the same format, okay? We start off with our characters, and our characters have already been affected by the horrific events which have gone on in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. They have all had some contact with the pizzerias in question. And if you don't know, and you don't feel like looking it up or whatever, what's happening, oh, and by the way, all of my reviews are spoiler reviews. I don't tiptoe around anything for the most part. So I'm just like, if you don't want to know what happens in Five Nights at Freddy's or in these novels in general, just don't watch the video. What's going on in Five Nights at Freddy's is that the animatronics that like perform in these kids' pizzerias, they have the souls of dead kids in them, because one of the people who originally helped to make the animatronics and the pizzerias in the first place is a serial killer, and his name is William Afton. So whenever you hear William Afton, just know that's the bad guy. And William Afton had a partner named Henry. I don't remember Henry's last name. And both of these people, I believe, had children, okay? Both Henry and William had children. And the first death, it was an accidental death that occurred. It happened to one of William's children. One of his children accidentally died because one of the animatronics bit his head off, or bit off his frontal lobe, whatever. He suffered major cranial damage, and I believe stayed alive for a while, but then died. It's something like that. And so that was like the first death. Because of this, William Afton went insane, and then he like blamed Henry for this, because Henry was the one who was originally making the animatronics or something like that. And so William decided he was going to get revenge on Henry, And so what he does is he kills one of Henry's children. And the first child of Henry's that dies is his daughter, whose name is Charlie, or Charlotte, okay? So these books, the main character is Charlie. And so I was confused when I started reading it, because I was just like, oh, is this kind of taking place in a different timeline? Because if I'm remembering correctly, Charlie dies fairly early on because Henry creates a specific robot to watch her, and that robot gets distracted or something, and William Afton ends up killing her anyway. And like her soul goes into like another row. So I was sitting there, I was like, oh, well, maybe they're like the game universe is one universe, the movie universe is another universe, and the book universe or the comic universe is another. Okay, so maybe they're doing something like that. Sort of, not really. The story is a little bit different or expanded, however you want to look at this. But the things going on, the things going on in this book are the kids who are involved, right? Not the murdered children. There's so many like kids in this series. So there are the kids who were murdered, right? Who were in the animatronic suits, William Afton's victims, and the children who were the victims of the Freddy Fazbear's or Freddy, like, there are so many freaking pizzerias is what I'm saying. That's another thing that gets aggravating in the books and in the series too, is like every 2 seconds, another like pizzeria and arcade is opening up every single time. And there's like 20 more animatronics. It's just like, oh my God, like stop. It doesn't make any sense. The kids are all affected by the events of Five Nights at Freddy's, and they keep coming back. Like something about the town and the situation keeps pulling them back in because they are very traumatized by all of this. And so in the first book, what has happened is the group of kids who are sort of our plucky gang, right, investigating all of this stuff, they have already been affected by the murders. And so in the past, one of their friends, Michael, went missing and is presumed dead. And like he's in one of the animatronics, okay? So they're all grieving the loss of their friend Michael and the fact that they never had any closure. And so the reason why they're all coming back to the town where this occurred is because they're having like a memorial service. The family is finally accepting that likely their son is dead. And also they are making sort of like a scholarship, like it's like a college scholarship, like in memoriam to their son. So all of the kids who were affected are coming back to this town in order to attend the memorial service. And also like, maybe one of them gets the college scholarship. I'm not sure, I don't remember. It's really not important. So in the first book, The Silver Eyes, that's what's going on. And so we have John and Charlie are like the only 2 important people. There are other side characters, the most important being Clay, who is a cop and the only like real adult besides William Afton and like Henry. There's Clay, there is Jessica, who ends up being important. When I'm saying important, it's as a plot point. Most of the characters in these books are plot devices. They are serving the narrative going on between John and Charlie. So Jessica is relatively important, and then Carlton is relatively important later on. Carlton is Clay's son, okay? But then like in the first book, there are like 3 other characters, which there's like a Marla, I remember her name is, and she does show up later, but she's really not that important. Marla's there, and she has a little brother who is just a plot device, okay? He's just a plot device for the first book. And then there is another guy who like never shows up again, but he's just in the first book, I think for diversity's sake, to be real with you. So they all are kind of getting back together. And John and Charlie are kind of like super close childhood friends, and it's fairly obvious that like John is in love with Charlie, but Charlie is very like traumatized and kind of obsessed with the whole Five Nights at Freddy's, the events of the like Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, because she is Henry's daughter. So she's related to the family. So the story is about exploring like her issues, her ongoing issues in being tied up very, very intimately with those events. The town suspecting that her own father was the one who killed not only his own children, like via these animatronics, but also other people's children as well. But no one knows for sure, because no one really knows about William Afton for some reason. And also Charlie's dad, Henry, like kills himself in the end. So when this story is picking up, like the first murder, it's like the first 2 sets of murders have already happened. There have already been 2 incarnations of this goddamn pizzeria. So this was like the second round of murders. Charlie's dad is dead, and Charlie is like severely traumatized by all of this and is trying to figure out like her life. And the Freddy's, what they think is the original Freddy's, which it's not, they find that out later. The Freddy's where this round of murders happened, where Michael was killed, their friend, they were saying, oh, it got knocked down and they built a mall over it. And so they end up going to where this mall is, because the mall like shut down because there's like a whole miasma over the whole place, because whenever anybody finds out that a bunch of kids died in this particular area, they're just like, yeah, no, we're not going to do business here. So nothing ever like flourishes in the place where Freddy's is or was. And so the kids go to investigate this like rundown mall. And in investigating the mall, they find that Freddy's really hasn't been torn down. It is, in fact, still in pristine condition. It's just that there's like this like facade in front of it. It's like they built the mall around the pizzeria. And so if you go behind this little hidden passageway, you can still access Freddy Fazbear's. And so that's how the events of the first novel, The Silver Eyes, goes down. They get into the place where Michael died, okay? This is like the second location. This is the second location of the Freddy's Pizzeria chain. And they start like messing around in there and exploring, and there's a security guard. Spoilers, the security guard is William Afton, if you didn't know. Whenever there's like a security guard, that's the bad person. So William Afton is still there, still around, and does he kill people? I mean, he tries to kill our plucky gang of like kids that are messing around with his stuff, because they're still trying, I think they're trying to figure out what happened to Michael still. I don't know. But regardless, the best thing about this first book, which I want to say this is the weakest book, and I thought maybe they changed writers, but here's the thing, I will say, this was the weakest written book. The writing was horrible in this, and so was the plot. And that really, like, it changes some in the second 2 books, but I will say that the writing did improve. The writing improved in the second 2 books. But this one, what it does really well, it's doing at the very beginning, it's focusing on predominantly, come on, baby. It's focusing predominantly on John and Charlie and their relationship, and how they are both responding to the trauma of the murders and the ongoing trauma, because these events will not stop. They will not end, and they're trying to figure out why. So whenever we are dealing predominantly with the character interactions, especially John and Charlie, because they are the most fleshed out, that's the most interesting thing. It's got almost nothing to do with the animatronics or Freddy Fazbear's. And for the first part of this book, when we're just dealing with the emotions and the characters, it's not fantastic, but it's the strongest part of the book. And it's the relationship between John and Charlie, the very interesting things that Charlie is dealing with as a character and as a girl. I really enjoyed that there was a girl main character for the most part for all of these books. And that she is in fact kind of not like the other girls, right? And we'll get to that, because unfortunately that turns a little bit. My interpretation is offensive. I'm not saying that what happens in the books is offensive, or not intentionally anyway. So Charlie is a very interesting girl, and I think for how she's written, her response to trauma is done very well, especially in this second book. Oh, this was where I was the most disappointed, was the second book. But for this first book, okay, the first part is really good based on the strength of the characters interacting and what they're responding to with the events. And also there is a very strong sense of like nostalgia, especially in this first book, in the beginning parts of it. And that was what was really compelling me to keep reading, was the atmosphere. It's really good in the first part of this book. And then and especially as they're discovering, as they're exploring the mall and they're rediscovering Freddy's and exploring Freddy's, that's also really good. It's giving you the same, like when you're getting into that, like the investigative parts of these novels, which happen in the first and second books predominantly, whenever they're doing that, it's giving you the same sort of pleasure that an investigative horror video game would. And I enjoy that sort of stuff, so I enjoyed those parts of the books predominantly. And then every single book falls apart at the midway point or just before. What the books become is just an excuse to trot out the animatronics again. And so what this devolves into is absolutely nothing with the characters that was set up. That's all very hastily done, like kind of at the end. So they do all this rich character stuff in the beginning, and then there's like a moment where the book just turns into very tedious action horror sequences featuring our plucky gang trying to evade the possessed and evil animatronics that populate Freddy Fazbear's in whatever incarnation we have of it, because we get Circus Baby's pizza in the final book, all right? So it just gets real stupid. And the thing is, the action sequences that the book devolves into aren't even tense, because typically the characters who are attempting to evade the animatronics aren't really Charlie or John, or like the tension that is built up between those two characters isn't playing out in the action sequences. And so there's no fear involved in the action sequences and no tension either. So it's just like, it's failure. It's a narrative failure because the animatronics also aren't skillfully representing anything in the story. The animatronics contain the souls of these dead kids, right? Which, yeah, is fine. That's very, very horrible. As a concept, it's very good. However, in the context of a novel, because that's the thing, you can get away with that in like a video game or a movie because you can do the jump scares, right? You can keep people going in that way. Even though most people who enjoy horror, maybe they like a little jump scare thing here and there, a little Blumhouse movie here and there. But for most people who enjoy horror, they're going to want something more eventually, or at least from another franchise or standalone movie or whatever. So it's just, in order especially to make something effective in a novel, like a possessed animatronic, it also has to be representing something else, which in this case, duh, it is the reoccurring trauma that is terrorizing Charlie. And the thing is, you can make the leap that that is what these animatronics are doing in the story. They are continually terrorizing these kids and they won't stop. But the thing is, it's not skillfully done within the narrative or the writing. It's just not. And so it's just like everything just becomes a plot device. Everything that they create at the beginning of the stories, they drop for the goofy Five Nights at Freddy's crap. And then they try to wrap things up like really quickly at the end. And it's bad. And it happens in all of the novels. So by the end of this novel, we have William Afton supposedly dead again. He's not, I don't think he's not Springtrap yet. If you don't know, just don't even worry about it. If you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, don't even worry about it. He is not Springtrap by the, when this book starts, I believe he is Springtrap by the end of this book because Charlie makes him Springtrap, okay? So by the end of this book, they kind of have an understanding, or at least one of the characters does, I guess, that their friend Michael was in fact murdered by William Afton and is in like the yellow Freddy's bear suit, okay? And they kind of, most of the novels end relatively happily with like evil being defeated and all of that stuff, at least for now, right? Because shocker, William Afton isn't dead. William Afton like never ever dies, ever. He's like the phantasm guy. It's never over. So that book ends really poorly. And in that book, like the kids are sort of in their final year of high school for the most part, though we have a varied age range within our plucky group. In the second book, The Twisted Ones, now the kids are in college and they have gone sort of their separate ways. Charlie and Jessica are going to the same college and they dorm together. John has left for a little while, but has now come back. The reason being because he, there was a storm in the town that they all live in where Charlie's childhood home is. And because of this storm, John, his job, he's like working in construction now. And so because there are all these construction needs in the town, he ends up coming back like for work. So he's not in college, but he's still the same age range as everybody else. Charlie and Jessica are in college and studying together. This book, at least the first part of it, is the best written. And like this is probably the novel that is also the best plotted, though it has the same disease. The same exact disease. And so in the beginning, like this was the most upsetting book for me to deal with because of how badly it failed, but how good the setup was. In this book, we are now dealing with the ramifications of what happened in the first book. So not only are we like dealing with like all of the deaths from like the first two incarnations of Freddy Fazbear's, right? We're dealing with also now what has happened in the novel, which is a fresh round of trauma. And Charlie is responding to this very accurately. Her depiction in the first part of the second book as someone dealing with trauma and perhaps neurodivergency. Because at this point, I was still kind of like, I see that they're going somewhere with this, but I'm not really sure where they're going with like the meta narrative of all three of these books. But like, I'm fairly certain Charlie's not gonna survive because she dies in the video game lore. So eventually she's gonna have to die. So in the beginning of this novel, Charlie is very disassociated. She's pulling away from the friends that she has to become very, very obsessed with what has been happening to her since like birth, because she's the one that's most closely tied to all the Freddy stuff, right? Because she's Henry's daughter. And so in college, she ends up studying robotics. And she's like working on this, she's working on how to get robots to learn language organically and how they can just sort of respond to each other. So it's kind of a little bit like AI. And this like goes, like the first part of this book gets most into the more technical aspects of robotics, at least like the general theories. This is like the most hard science that we get in the books, okay? And it's not hard at all, but I appreciate the little nods to some actual robotics concepts. And the project that Charlie is working on is actually fairly creepy. It's these two like disembodied heads that are learning to talk to each other, but it's implied that like potentially these two disembodied heads like actually have something in them or are supernatural in some way. It's a creepy thing and it's effective. The way that it's done within the narrative, it's a very effective device. It's very creepy. And what's more creepy is the fact that Charlie's obsessed with it and she's trying to hide it from her friends. She does not want her friends to know how obsessed she is with robotics, with figuring out what happened in her own family, with, her core trauma, by the way, is the supposed abduction of her twin brother by William Afton. That was like the first thing that she dealt with in Freddy's. She has survivor's guilt. So she's constantly like obsessed with her twin, with finding her twin, with figuring out what happened to her twin. Is her twin in one of the animatronics? I don't know. And also figuring out the animatronics, because if you can preserve people's souls within an alternate body, like, can we do something else here? So this is all kind of bizarre necromancy. And so the fact that she's getting so obsessed with this and she's behaving in a very realistic way, the first part of this book is actually the most emotionally gut-wrenching, because what we have is Charlie and Charlie's behavior juxtaposed between herself and her more well-adjusted friend group. And so Jessica and John are more like I'm not fine, but they are more like normal, let's say. And they care very much about Charlie and they want her to integrate into real life with them. And the more they're trying to do that, the more she's pulling away from them. And especially with John, in the second book, John sort of like, in his time away from Charlie and the gang, he's gone off, and it is implied, because all of the stuff that is done with kids and their development in these books is very, very tasteful. Even like the horrible murders and everything. None of that is done on the page. It is just implied, or it is said, like, this is what is happening after the fact. And it's horrible enough, right? You don't have to have all of that on the page. There are books that get away with that, but you know, you typically, you're earning that kind of shit. You're earning your kid deaths, okay? So John, in his time away from the group, it is implied that he has been in some sort of serious relationship that is not with Charlie, and so he has had a sexual experience. They don't say that on the page. The way they're describing it is Charlie is viewing him, and it's like, oh, he's different now. It's essentially he's become a man, because instead of going to college and pursuing his writing, he didn't have the money for that. So he was like, why not just write and like get a job? So he starts working in construction. And straight up with John, I love that like he's made those choices and that he's very much like a practical character, because a lot of time YA especially isn't dealing with those like day-to-day real life decisions that people make to survive in the world. They just have them going off to these like lofty colleges. Like, it's very of a certain class, or a fantasy version of a class. So it's nice to have a character that is very grounded in reality, especially for something like the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. And how I would describe John, especially in all of the books really, John is a good guy. He is a caring individual. He's thoughtful, he's considerate, but he's not like a fantasy version of a guy or a man. He's just a solid individual who loves Charlie. But the fact that he loves Charlie doesn't mean that in his time away from her, he doesn't explore other things. He, in fact, has a life outside of her, but in exploring those other things and those other aspects of life, he realizes that, oh no, in fact, I love Charlie, and I want to be with Charlie in a real relationship. Like, they never get like married, okay, but essentially he knows he wants to marry her. And so what is so upsetting in this second book, at least in the first part of it, is that dichotomy between John and Charlie, that he is trying to like pull her into a very healthy, well-adjusted, real life filled with love and family and all of this stuff. And she is obsessed with her father and the murders and everything that happened at Five Nights at Freddy's. And when they're together and they're going on these dates, she's completely disassociated and not paying attention to him, and she blows him off and all of this stuff, and it is legitimately upsetting. Because, like, in general, you're gonna want your characters to ultimately have the happy ending, right? But the thing is, what makes their interaction so great is that it's very true. That is the way someone who is dealing with severe trauma behaves. They do pull away from people. They do self-sabotage the relationships that are good for them. So even though, at least I was sitting there reading like, oh no, like just go with John, like you can have this like wonderful, like nice life. He's a great guy. She's still obsessed and she can't let it go. And where this falls apart is that what should have happened, I believe, is that she should have ruined all of her friendships. Like, that should have happened. She should have suffered consequences for her actions with her interpersonal relationships. That never happens. Her friends, in fact, just get sucked into her nonsense again, but they're fine with it. They're cool with it. And in fact, the writing would have you believe that, like, deep down inside, they want to be sucked in to the Five Nights at Freddy's shit. And the thing is, you could even write that well, because that's not an untrue response to this sort of stuff. But it's kind of like the characters are behaving one way and then they just make a turn for the plot's sake because the Five Nights at Freddy's shit has to go down again. So it falls apart. It falls apart, and this time there's like an entire secret Freddy's like arcade underneath the facade of Charlie's childhood home. And I'm just like, how many fucking secret pizzerias? Who had the money for this? Where is it coming from? I'm just like, you just can't, you've got to leave it. It's just like, this is just the Freddy's universe, okay? And you just go with it or you don't go with it. But I'm like sitting there all twisted up, like, okay, but like, for the construction to be done on something like that, you would need to have a whole like team of people, and like you can't keep that quiet. How is this all secret? It is impossible. Anyway, so like it's just, don't worry about reality. Don't worry about reality when it comes to the Five Nights at Freddy's big old bag of bullshit. So again, this novel falls apart when it devolves into the Freddy's nonsense. And all the characters just go, oh yeah, I guess we're doing this again. And then it devolves into tedious action sequences with whatever animatronics we are dealing with in this version of the novel. And in this one, we have like the old set of animatronics, and then we have a new set of animatronics that were like somehow hidden in Charlie's like old house, and that's who the twisted ones are, right? The twisted ones, I believe, are the creations of William Afton, not Henry. So the Henry like based animatronics who have the original dead kids in them, those are the good ones. And then there are the William Afton ones that are the bad ones, okay? And so how the events happen this time around is that all of a sudden people start turning up dead, and I think it's people, like their bodies are all torn up. And the reason why they're dead is because like they're in the Springtrap based suits. But I forget why that they're actually like killing these people. It doesn't really matter. It's just a plot device. But anyway, so these bodies start showing, because the reason why the bodies have to show up is so that like we know that there are animatronics somewhere out there hunting down Charlie. So they're all obsessed with Charlie. And every time a body shows up, it's like getting closer and closer and closer to like Charlie's location. And so everybody's like, oh no, oh Charlie, like blah, blah, blah. We have to like converge and save you like yet again. And so the final sequence of this is Charlie navigating the secret, like weird arcade animatronic environment that has been in her own house this whole time. And the end of this novel happens is like the house is collapsing on itself, right? It's collapsing on itself after our plucky gang gets out, sort of. Charlie believes that her dead twin is in a closet that is like has been revealed from this secret portion of the house where the animatronics were all hidden. And so she's trying to get into this closet because she believes her brother is in this closet. And so one of the animatronics ends up getting a hold of her, and like John is there trying to get her out, and the animatronic like springs on her. And so what John sees is her getting like bear trapped by this suit, okay? And there's lots of blood and everything. The closet never opens. All of a sudden, like John like kind of looks one way, and then he turns around and he's like, Charlie's Aunt Jen is there. Aunt Jen has been this background side character. She's the one who took care of Charlie after Charlie's dad like committed, unalived, okay? So Aunt Jen just like poof, materializes right at the scene, like right on time. And like he sees her sort of over the springed, trapped, probably dead Charlie, we're assuming at this point. And so, and I forget at what point the exchange that I'm about to tell you about happens. There is also a point, I believe it is in the Twisted One's second novel, where William Afton is also there, and Charlie, it's either at the end of the second book or at the beginning of the third book. Charlie is just like, I want to know like what you did. Her twin's name is Sammy. I want to know what you did to Sammy. I want to know what you did to my brother. I want to know why you took him. And William Afton tells her, I didn't take him, I took you. And so it's just like, what? Okay. And like, at this point, I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And like, I probably should have figured this out like way sooner based on like the video game lore. And also, okay, let's see how they handle this in the third book. So at the end of the second book, we think like, oh, Charlie's dead, and all the people who have been affected by Charlie's death or whatever are at this diner. And as they're at the diner, miraculously, Charlie walks in, but it's like this super hot version of Charlie, okay? Because something that I appreciated about Charlie's character in the second book was A, how effectively they were writing trauma responses. B, to me, I was just like, Charlie, they never say it outright, but for me, Charlie was really good, like trauma rep, neurodivergency rep. I was like, I think that if someone on the spectrum or people who know people on the spectrum would recognize certain qualities about Charlie within themselves or their family members or their friends, but it's hard to really pinpoint that because it also could just be the extreme disassociation that she's dealing with in the text, okay? But she's also pursuing a STEM-based field, and she's very, very fixated on her projects. She doesn't care so much about people, she cares about her projects and the robots and her toys and things like that. And she, even in looking at herself compared to her friends, she's like, I feel like I've remained like a child and all of these people have grown up and I don't feel grown up. I feel like whatever has happened to them has made them into adults, and whatever has happened to me has made me further into a child. And like, that's a very powerful thing. That is never, I'm just like, oh my God, the best things about this shit were just dropped for the Five Nights at Freddy's crap. And so at the beginning of the third novel, which is The Fourth Closet, this is also, in comparison to the first book, better written and better plotted. The best book out of the three is the second one, because this is just trying to do too much, the third novel. So let me think about, and it doesn't even, like, it kind of starts kind of strong, but this is the most mid. Both of the first and the second book have like really strong openings that like fall apart. This book stays mid pretty much throughout, so we don't really have a falling apart part, but it's mid. The quality is just whatever. And by the time I got to this book, I was so fucking over it. I was just like, because here's the thing, I'm talking about the quality of the writing. The writing is not good. It is like passable, like you will understand what is being written here, but it's very boring. The language is not interesting. And I'm not asking for Five Nights at Freddy's to like be doing somersaults and backflips and triple axles with the pros, but I mean, the verb choice, the adjective choice is substandard. It is boring and it lacks tension. And so even the action sequences as they're written in the active voice are doing nothing. It's a big bunch of nothing. Nothing! Okay? So in this book, we are starting with like super hot Charlie making the scene, and like some time has passed since the initial event has happened. John has taken it into his head that the Charlie that has like made her debut on the scene, that is a fake Charlie. That is not a real Charlie. That is not the Charlie that he knows. So he's like in some sort of weird reality bubble. Spoilers, it's not a reality bubble. But for the sake of the first part of this novel, it's essentially Charlie and John have sort of flipped identities. Whereas Charlie was the one obsessed and disassociating and everything in the second book, and John was kind of like trying to get her into real life, it's sort of John is the one who's in this weird obsessive reality bubble. He's losing his connections at work, his friendships. He doesn't want to go out. He loses his job. All kinds of stuff happens to him. Charlie is the one attempting to be like, no, John, it is me. Like, what is it about me that like you think is not real? And that's an interesting exploration in that if it wasn't literal that she wasn't a fake Charlie, because she is a fake Charlie. What has happened, if it was like real Charlie, Charlie grew up in between the second and the third book and has come into herself like as a woman and into her maturity. She's not like gangly and awkward anymore. She understands fashion choices. She knows how to style herself. She has become the adult, elegant expression of herself. And not only that, but I wish it would have been like a real thing, okay? Because this is all very, very interesting to kind of cope with. She's also trying to like convince John that like she survived the suit crushing her. She had to go through all these surgeries, and she is in fact in like constant pain from this. So I was like, oh, this could be incredibly interesting. We're now dealing with the character who's also dealing with chronic pain from this severe like physical trauma that they just went through, and their closest friend is like gaslighting them and going, you're not a real person. They became the adult they always wanted to be. They're dealing with chronic pain. They've put like as best as they can their trauma behind them. They're trying to move on with their life, and their best friend is now going, you're fake. Fake news. You're not the real Charlie. The Charlie that I knew was a wreck, and that's the Charlie who I love. And so because you are not those things, you're not real. If that was actually going on, if it was actually the real Charlie and John was responding to her in that way based on the trauma of him watching the person who he loves the most get crushed to death in a freaking animatronic suit, I would have been so here for that. That's not what's going on. It is a fake Charlie. She's a freaking robot, okay? They find the real Charlie. The real Charlie. In Aunt Jen's house. I thought Aunt Jen was an animatronic for a while. I don't think that's the case. She's a person. But like, fake Charlie is actually like a homicidal robot. In this book, we don't have a Freddy Fazbear's, we have Circus Baby's Pizza. It doesn't matter. It's still Freddy's, okay? It's still a pizzeria with animatronics that are luring in children to kill them for William Afton's like grand design that we really never truly find out about. And I don't think like, we have another William Afton like death scene in this by the end of the book. Probably he's not dead though. You know, that's just the way it goes. He's like Freddy Krueger. William Afton is like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason. They don't die. So in this book, we have the final confrontation. And then again, this book devolves into tedious action sequences of this round of animatronics trying to kill blah, blah. Who cares? No one cares. because the characters that they're trying to kill for the most part aren't even Charlie and John anymore. It's Jessica and Carlton, because they're trying to like save these kids, a new fresh round of kids in jeopardy in Circus Baby's Pizza. And they do, just by the way, they save all these kids and they're fine. But so the big reveal in the final book is that, yes, that's a fake Charlie, okay? But also, the Charlie that we have been experiencing throughout all of the novels, our main character, and this is why I'm saying it's offensive, and like, to me, I feel like if you identify with Charlie as also like a ace arrow representation, or neurodivergent representation, or trauma representation, I'm cool with all of that, but the thing is, the truth about Charlie, the Charlie main character, the real Charlie, is that she is also a construct. She is an animatronic. She is a robot. And so that comparison to people with neurodivergencies or ace arrow and that kind of stuff, that is offensive, because people, just based on the way that I behave, I've also had comparisons to being a robot. And while it's not like completely crushing to me, it's just sort of like, okay, thank you for that. And they'll like try and backtrack really quickly. They'll be like, oh no, Allison, it's just because, you know, you're really like efficient and like reliable and like smart and blah, blah, blah. I didn't really mean to. And it's just like, let's just leave it as you experience me as robotic and somehow inhuman. Let's just all sit with that one. So that's why I'm saying that me describing Charlie as that sort of rep is potentially very offensive, because she's in fact a robot. But she's a robot that Henry, her father, essentially created a thought form that he managed to pin inside of a doll at first, Charlie's favorite doll growing up. And then like he was able to transfer this via magical supernatural means into various more complex constructions that he was able to create of his own dead child. And so there was never like a twin brother. I don't think there was ever a twin, a real twin. Charlie never had a twin that was abducted. It was always herself. It was the real Charlie, the human Charlie, that was taken. And then like, because it's like she's experiencing, because there are many Charlies, many versions of Charlie, she's experiencing these memories. She doesn't really have Charlie, the real Charlie's memories. She has her father's memories and fabrications and fantasy versions of what Charlie was to him. Those are the memories that she has access to, because her soul is not the real Charlie's soul, Charlotte's soul. Her soul is a piece of Henry. It is Henry that is inside of her, not Charlotte, not his daughter. So he was able to, as a lich, create a little soul container for himself, but he pretended like it was his daughter. And so that's how the Charlie that we have been following came to be. And so eventually Charlie has a face-off with her evil twin, and seemingly they both destroy each other. John obviously is reunited with the Charlie that he knows, the real Charlie, who is in fact a robot. She's still a construction created by her insane father, who was driven insane by his own grief at losing his daughter at the hands of his business partner, William Afton. And so that's why this is all going on. And so William Afton and the stuff going on at Circus Baby's Pizza is almost an afterthought, even though they try and make it like the large set piece for all the action sequences at the end of the third book. But in the face-off between Charlie and her twin, we get all of this exposition, all of like, here's what really happened, here's what's really going on. And then it seems like the two versions of Charlie destroy themselves, and John has this awareness now that the Charlie that he loves is in fact not a real person. But that's sort of hand-waved. We never really get his full perspective on that ever. But there's sort of this wrap-up at the end where everybody's in this hospital room because Carlton, Clay's son, in trying to free the children from Circus Baby's Pizza, he undergoes a severe bodily trauma. He almost dies, but he doesn't die. But he also has a catharsis moment with Michael, the kid who died, who they all knew from the first novel. And it's like, oh, his soul went into the light. All the children have gone into the light for now, you know. And so he has his catharsis moment with Michael. And so the Michael story, which is also an afterthought in all of these books, gets kind of closed up. We're in the hospital with Carlton. All the friends are there, obviously sans Charlie. And Clay is just like, oh, you know, we don't know what happened to Charlie. We're going to keep looking for her. And John is kind of cryptically like, you're never going to find her, you know, but it's just like, okay, so he knows. And so the final scene is him going to a graveyard, and we see these two gravestones that he visited. What is that person's name? What is his name? They don't, I cannot get Henry's last name. One of the gravestones is Henry. And then the other gravestone is Charlotte Emily. So that's his daughter. That's Charlie. So she's been dead, this whole, like, the real Charlie, right? But the thing is, when he goes to the graveyard, we get this reference in the book that there is a woman standing under a tree at a distance from the graves who's like waving to him or beckoning to him. And he sees this woman and he goes and joins this woman. We do not know who that is. Don't know who it is. And they walk off together into the sunset. Now, I know that there are more, there's like a short story collection for these that continue on. Based on the quality of these 3 books, we am now removing all Five Nights at Freddy's, written everything Five Nights at Freddy's, done. I say that, but like every so often I say I'm done with things, and then like a couple of years later I'm like, well, what if it's actually good? Like I forget how bad it is and I get into a karmic cycle with it. But I'm not purchasing, and it's just, no, it's bad. It's bad quality, which is too bad because there are some really great concepts within all of this stuff. And if they would have just taken the time, and if they would have done, like, because there is a way to do the Five Nights at Freddy's standard big old bag of bullshit, but adapt it effectively for a novel. The issue is they're trying to, at least with like the action sequences, recreate the same horror that you are experiencing in the games in the novel. And it's a different format. And it's like the movie knows that. The movie did its best, and I think it did what it did relatively well, while still nodding at what makes Five Nights at Freddy's Five Nights at Freddy's. The books try to wholesale like scare you in the same way that the video games do, and you can't do that in a novel. It's like an entirely different format, an entirely different beast. But I would say that if you're a super fan of Five Nights at Freddy's in general, probably you'll enjoy this stuff, especially because it's dealing with like the deep lore or whatever. Also, if you're really young, you might like these, but if you're an adult, okay, this stuff is going to be very tedious. And especially tedious because it's the same problem copied into infinity. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. All right, and it's a bad copy at that. What it was copying originally was tedious and too simplistic for a novel. So that's my review of these. They're not good, which is disappointing because the concepts that they're playing with are very good. And I wish somebody would sort of take this and like just do the concepts better or something like this. Like actually make kind of like a more sophisticated version of Five Nights at Freddy's, because yeah, you can do that. It's just not going to be Five Nights at Freddy's, obviously. So what else do I want to say about this? Oh, the reason why I had invested in this series was because I did enjoy what I enjoyed of the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, the video games, even though I never played them. I was only ever interested in like the storyline that you were getting little bits of throughout that game playing process. So I didn't bother with any of that, and I just waited for the people to put the videos out. And then when I saw the movie, I very much enjoyed the movie for what it was. And I hope they make another one. I'll go see another movie if it's like of the same fare that the first one was. I found that an enjoyable experience despite its clumsiness. And what I wanted in reading the books was I knew these were YA. By the way, even though these are like all the kids are YA and upper YA age, and like the themes and issues that we're dealing with would be like for teenagers, these feel like middle grade books. Like this does not feel like YA writing, which is also very weird because you're dealing with very, very adult things written in like a middle grade way. It's odd, but that has always also been a conceit of the Freddy's universe as well. But I don't know that it's hitting correctly. It feels like a mistake rather than something that is being done intentionally, okay? So I invested in these also because I am working on a novel that is almost nothing like Five Nights at Freddy's, but it involves an abandoned amusement park. And one of the things that is in that amusement park are, yes, animatronics. There are animatronics in the amusement park, and there is a particular sequence that is very Five Nights at Freddy's-esque. And so I was very interested in seeing how they worked those concepts into YA novels. Because at first, when I first started my novel, I was like, okay, well, this is going to be YA. And then as I went, like, the concept expanded, and I was like, I don't know that this is YA. This might be an adult book written in like I don't write literary fiction, right? I don't write hard to read shit. I write very, very commercial, hopefully compelling, interesting, easy to read shit. So to me, it's like YA writing, but it's an adult book, right? I don't know that I could potentially sell that as YA, even though the main characters are teenagers and they're dealing with very like teenage concepts. There are too many other parts of the book that like get into history that are like, I don't know. I don't know that that's probably not going to be able to be something that's could be pitched as YA, is what I'm saying. But I wanted to read these because I was just like, when you're pitching something, when you're querying something, you need comp titles. If you don't know what that is, and you've never like written a query letter or anything, you don't know anything about submitting something for publication, comp titles, when you're writing your query letter, that's essentially trying to sell your book, the concept of your book, to an agent. You're writing this letter to, it's like a sizzle reel almost. You're trying to be very like engaging in a very short amount of space to get the agent interested enough that they read your sample pages, and that then they are requesting the full manuscript and potentially signing you to the agency to get your book a deal. Okay, that's how that works. At the end of, queries are not blurbs, but let's just go ahead and say the main body of the query is like an engaging blurb. It's a thing, it's a description of the book that makes you want to read the book. At the end of that, there's this little, you can put it at the beginning, at the end. I prefer to put it at the end. You're talking about the category, you're telling the agent the category and the genre of your work, which category is like YA, adult, middle grade. Genre is science fiction, fantasy, literary, horror. The word count, the length of the novel, the word count, and then comp titles. My novel is like this book meets this book. Because what they're trying to get you to do is to, so if like I'm using Five Nights at Freddy's as a comp title. My book is Five Nights at Freddy's. The way I was comping it right now within my draft of the query, it's nowhere near query ready, but I do have a query letter. I'm comping it with like Corpse Party and the Dead. It's like Corpse Party meets The Dead and the Dark, which is accurate fairly, but I was like, and I would put like, I was like, there's something else. I want to use like another comp title, and I used House of Leaves. House of Leaves is way too old, and that's firmly an adult title. So I was looking for a better comp title, because Corpse Party is, well, Corpse Party, I don't know that they have light novels, but they do have a manga. Dead in the Dark is firmly YA, and it's relatively recent, but I really needed to update my comp title. So I needed to read more YA horror, okay? So I wanted to read this, to see if they did this concept well, so that I could more effectively write a creepy sequence with animatronics. It didn't. However, I still needed to read these novels because there is stuff in my novel that I believe would appeal to a Five Nights at Freddy's crowd who still have great love for Five Nights at Freddy's, but who perhaps have aged out of it and are looking for something else. They're looking for something like it, but not it, right? So that's why we have comp titles. There's no character in my book that's like a robot. Like, that's not what I'm dealing with. I am dealing with predominantly 4 teen girls who are paranormal investigators on YouTube who go to investigate a shut down, defunct amusement park at the behest of their ringleader friend. And in investigating that amusement park, terrible things start to happen that perhaps as things go on, the ringleader friend always knew would happen and is in fact behind for, you know, nefarious purposes. So that's what's predominantly going on in my novel. So it's the same sort of conceit as it is a childhood place that is defunct, that these kids, these teens are investigating, and bad shit starts happening there. The reason why my shit is happening is completely different from like I have no, well, it's not that I don't have a William Afton, but it's like there's this whole, like the history parts of this, the stuff that's not happening in the present or the future has to do with a family. Like generations, like I have like right now, what's driving me nuts is I have to write all these historical portions of this novel following like several generations of a particular family and all the weird, disgusting crap that they got up to in order to create the believable version of the amusement park. There's a reason why the amusement park exists. There's a reason why things are going on as they are going on for these 14 girls, and that goes way further back in history. What is happening to them, this explosion of events that is happening, is it's a canon event. It's a culmination of so many events that have happened in history converging into this one location for these 14 girls that ends up having similar, serious ramification on the wider world in the aftermath of these events that go down at the amusement park. And so Ridley Scott-esque, in the Ridley Scott sense, if you don't know, if you've never seen the documentary about the making of Blade Runner was originally, interestingly, also about androids and robots. Blade Runner was originally written to be like a one-room movie. So people, like the characters were all having like dialogue and events happening in one room or in one house. They never went outside. That was the original script from the writer. And then when they like went through all of these iterations of the script and like Ridley Scott came in, what he supposedly, I believe he probably said something to this effect to this person. He said, what does the outside look like? And the guy was just, since he was very like tied to the one room concept, he was like, why do you care about what's happening outside? Fuck what's going on outside, who cares? And Ridley Scott told him, no, the world outside of this room has to support the fact that this person is a robot. It has to be believable. You have to have a believable world. You can't just have somebody who's a robot, who like you're confused that they're like, are they a human? Are they a robot? You can't just have that. The entire reality has to support that for the audience to believe it. And that is how Five Nights at Freddy's fails. The surrounding environment does not support the reality of the book. And that's not something that I want to repeat in my novel, whether I do that effectively or ineffectively. So the rest of my world has to support the events that are happening in this fucked up amusement park. Therefore, research.